All right, you beautiful bastards, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to delve into some seriously fucked up shit. Precocious puberty. You know when some poor kid's hormones decide to go haywire and turn them into a goddamn teenager before they even finished elementary school? Yeah, we're going there. We've got a mountain of research, medical mumbo-jumbo, and some seriously messed up historical anecdotes to unpack. So buckle up, Buttercup, and get ready for a wild ride.
Let's cut the crap and get straight to it. Precocious puberty, in a nutshell, is when a kid starts sprouting boobs, getting their first period, or rocking a hairy nutsack way before they should. We're talking girls under 8 and boys under 9. It's not just about hitting puberty early, it's about hitting puberty significantly earlier than the expected norms.
So if my little dude starts sporting a pube stash before he's even double digits, should I be shitting bricks?
It's definitely a red flag. It's time to drag the little fucker to the doctor and get him checked out. Now this whole precocious puberty thing comes in two flavors, central and peripheral. Central precocious puberty is like the brain's control center saying, fuck it, let's hit the gas on those hormones way too early. Peripheral precocious puberty, on the other hand, is like some rogue hormone factory in the body deciding to go into overdrive.
So one's a brain fuck up and the other's like a hormonal mutiny. What the hell triggers this early bird puberty in the first place? Is it just a genetic crapshoot, or are there other things that can screw up the hormonal timetables?
There's a whole laundry list of potential culprits. In central precocious puberty, you've got brain tumors, infections like meningitis head trauma, and even some rare genetic conditions like McCune-Albright syndrome. It's pretty wild, right? Imagine a brain tumor sending your kid into puberty.
Holy shit, a brain tumor. That's some seriously fucked up shit. Talk about a shitty hand to be dealt. So if my kid suddenly starts raiding my stash of dirty magazines at age 7, I should be booking a brain scan, right?
Not necessarily. While a brain tumor can be a cause, it's not the most common one. In fact, in most cases, particularly in girls, the exact cause remains a mystery. We call that idiopathic precocious puberty.
Idiopathic. Sounds like a fancy word for we're clueless. So sometimes it's just a hormonal whodunit with no clear suspect. All right, what about this peripheral precocious puberty? What kind of hormonal anarchy are we talking about here?
In this case, the hormones are coming from somewhere other than the brain. Think adrenal tumors, gonadal tumors, or conditions like congenital adrenal hyperplasia, where the adrenal glands pump out androgens like there's no tomorrow.
So are we talking about kids with adrenal glands the size of grapefruits? And what the hell are androgens anyway? Is that just a fancy name for testosterone?
Androgens are a group of hormones that play a key role in male sexual development. Testosterone is the most well-known androgen, but there are others. In girls, androgens are produced in smaller amounts, but they still play a role in things like pubic hair growth and libido.
Okay, so even the girls have a bit of that roid rage potential. Interesting. But let's get back to the triggers. I've heard all this crap about hormones in food and how it's messing with our kids' development. Is there any truth to that, or is it just a bunch of fear-mongering bullshit?
There's actually some evidence linking environmental factors to early puberty, particularly in girls. Obesity, for example, has been linked to earlier puberty in girls, possibly due to the increased production of estrogen in fat tissue.
So you're saying that those chicken nugget-fueled childhood obesity epidemics could be turning our little girls into preteens. That's some scary shit, man. What about all those chemicals and plastics and pesticides? Are those screwing with our kids' hormones too?
There's research on exposure to xenoestrogens, which are chemicals that mimic estrogen, but the link to precocious puberty is still being investigated. It's definitely an area of ongoing research.
Xenowhatchamacalates. Sounds like something out of a goddamn sci-fi movie. So are we saying that our kids are basically swimming in a sea of hormone-disrupting chemicals? That's fucked up. But what's weird is you mentioned earlier that girls seem to be hitting puberty earlier, but boys might actually be hitting puberty later. What the hell is going on with those hormonal timetables?
It's a bit of a hormonal paradox, isn't it? The research on delayed puberty in boys is still emerging, but obesity seems to be a potential factor there too. It's fascinating how these environmental factors can have such different effects on boys and girls.
Fascinating. I'd say it's more like a hormonal shit show. It's like Mother Nature is playing a cruel joke on our kids. All right, let's say a kid does have precocious puberty. How the hell do doctors figure out if it's actually a problem or if they're just a fast bloomer?
Diagnosing precocious puberty involves a bit of detective work. Doctors will do a physical exam looking for those telltale signs like breast development or pubic hair. They'll also likely order blood tests to measure hormone levels, looking at those key puberty hormones that control the whole process. And they might even check bone age using an x-ray of the wrist to see if the bones are maturing faster than expected.
So it's like a hormonal CSI episode, right?
Right.
Examining the evidence, gathering clues, trying to piece together the puzzle. What's the big deal with catching this shit early anyway? Aside from the whole, my kid looks like a teenager and they still believe in the tooth fairy thing. I mean,
Early diagnosis is crucial for a few reasons. First off, precocious puberty can impact adult height. If puberty kicks in too early, those growth plates in the bones might close prematurely, leading to a shorter stature than the child might have otherwise achieved.
so we're talking about kids getting cheated out of their full growth potential. That's
No.
some bullshit.
And then there are the psychological and social implications to consider. Imagine being a 7-year-old girl with developing breasts. She's going to stand out, face potential bullying and teasing, and deal with feelings and situations she's not emotionally prepared for. Plus, early puberty can increase the risk of sexual abuse because these kids look older than they are.
Damn, that's heavy shit. It's not just about physical changes. It's about the emotional and psychological fallout. We got to protect these kids, man.
Absolutely. And don't forget, early diagnosis also allows us to rule out any serious underlying medical conditions like those brain tumors we talked about earlier.
Makes sense. So early diagnosis is key. But what if we do find a kid with precocious puberty? Can we hit the brakes on this hormonal roller coaster, or are they just stuck riding it out?
Thankfully, we've got some tools to manage this shit. The main approach is using something called GnRH agonists, also known as puberty blockers.
Like puberty blockers, what the hell are those?
Mm.
Do they involve some kind of chemical castration or something?
Hold your horses. It's not that extreme. GnRH agonists are medications that work by tricking the pituitary gland into stopping the production of those hormones driving puberty.
So we're basically giving these kids hormone blockers to stop the hormones that are causing problems because of other hormones. Isn't that a bit of a mindfuck?
It sounds more complicated than it is. Basically, GnRH agonists help regulate the hormonal chaos and give the child's body and mind a chance to catch up. It's about managing the physical and psychological effects of precocious puberty and potentially improving their final adult height. Of course, there are potential side effects and the importance of long-term monitoring, but overall, GnRH agonists can be very effective.
Oh, wait, so we're not talking about a hormonal lobotomy here. But this is some seriously complicated shit. And what about the kids themselves? Early puberty can't be easy on a young mind. How the hell do they deal with looking like a grown-up when they're still a goddamn child?
You're absolutely right. The psychological and social impacts of precocious puberty can be incredibly challenging. These kids might feel isolated, different from their peers, and they might even attract unwanted attention that puts them at risk.
Yeah, that's some heavy shit. We'll have to delve deeper into that whole psychological aspect later on. But let's shift gears for a minute and talk about something a little lighter, the historical context. I mean, early puberty isn't a new phenomenon, right? People have been freaking out about early bloomers for centuries. What the hell did they think was going on back in the day before we had all this fancy medical knowledge?
You're right. This isn't some new age phenomenon. Precocious puberty has been documented throughout history, and the theories about its causes have ranged from the somewhat logical to the downright bizarre.
Give me the juicy details. What kind of crazy explanations did they come up with? Were we blaming it on demons and witches back then?
Well, in ancient times, it was often attributed to an imbalance of humors, those bodily fluids that were thought to control health and temperament. Too much blood or phlegm, for example, could supposedly trigger early puberty. And yes, there were also theories involving demonic possession, witchcraft, and even the influence of the stars.
Demons and stars, huh?
Yeah.
Talk about some old school bullshit.
Yeah.
It's amazing how far we've come in understanding this stuff. So we've covered a lot of ground here in part one. We've defined the goddamn thing, explored those wacky historical theories, and even dipped our toes into the murky waters of puberty blockers. But hold on to your hats, folks, because we're just getting started. In part two, we're going to delve even deeper into this hormonal rabbit hole. Stay tuned, you magnificent bastards.
All right, let's unpack this whole puberty blocker thing a bit more, because it's not as simple as just hitting the pause button on puberty. When we use GnRH agonists to treat precocious puberty, the goal is to temporarily suppress those hormones that are driving those early changes. Things like breast development, pubic hair growth, and even the start of menstruation in girls.
So we're not talking about a full-blown shutdown of puberty, just a temporary timeout,
Yeah.
like putting those raging hormones on a leash for a bit.
Exactly. We're not permanently stopping puberty. We're essentially hitting the snooze button, giving the child's body and mind a chance to catch up and mature at a more appropriate pace. And the good news is that once the treatment is stopped, usually around the typical age of puberty onset, those natural hormones kick back in and puberty resumes its normal course.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's be real, there have got to be some downsides to messing with a kid's hormones like this, right? I mean, what are the potential side effects of these puberty blockers? Are we talking mood swings, acne explosions, a sudden craving for broccoli?
Those are valid questions. Like any medication, GnRH agonists can have side effects, but they're generally mild and manageable. The most common ones are headaches, hot flashes, and some injection site reactions because the medication is usually given as an injection.
So basically, the side effects sound like a mild case of PMS, not exactly a fate worse than death. But what about the long-term effects? Are we screwing these kids up down the road by messing with their hormones now?
That's a major concern, of course, but the research so far suggests that long-term use of GnRH agonists for precocious puberty is safe and doesn't have any lasting negative impacts on fertility, bone health, or overall well-being. There have been studies looking at women who are treated for precocious puberty with GnRH agonists, and they've shown no difference in their ability to get pregnant or have healthy babies compared to women who didn't receive treatment.
All right, so we're not condemning these kids to a life of infertility or brittle bones. That's reassuring. But what about the psychological side of things? I mean, going through puberty is already awkward as hell. Imagine having it stopped and started again because some doctor decided to play puppet master with your hormones.
It's undoubtedly a complex issue. And you're right, the psychological and social impact of precocious puberty and the treatment itself can be challenging. It's important to remember that each child is unique and will experience these things differently. Some kids might feel relieved to have those early changes stopped, while others might struggle with feeling different from their peers or worry about what will happen when treatment ends and puberty starts back up again.
So there's no one-size-fits-all answer here. It's all about figuring out what's best for each individual kid and providing the right support.
Exactly. It's about open communication support from family and healthcare providers and careful monitoring throughout the treatment process. It's about addressing both the physical and emotional needs of the child and helping them navigate this incredibly complex experience.
This is heavy stuff. I'm starting to get a contact high just thinking about all these hormones. Let's switch gears for a minute and talk about something a little lighter, the historical context. You mentioned earlier that early puberty isn't a new phenomenon. People have been freaking out about it for centuries. What the hell did they think was going on back in the day before we had all this fancy medical knowledge?
You're right. Precocious puberty has been documented throughout history, and the theories about its causes have ranged from the somewhat logical to the downright bizarre.
Give me the juicy details. What kind of crazy explanations did they come up with? Were we blaming it on demons and witches back then? Spill the historical tea.
Well, in ancient times, it was often attributed to an imbalance of humors, those bodily fluids that were thought to control health and temperament. Too much blood or phlegm, for example, could supposedly trigger early puberty. And yes, there were theories involving demonic possession, witchcraft, and even the influence of the stars.
Demons and stars, huh? Talk about some old school bullshit. It's amazing how far we've come in understanding this stuff. It's mind-boggling to think about the kind of wacky remedies they probably tried back then. Leeches, bloodletting, maybe a good old-fashioned exorcism to cast out those puberty demons.
We're not far off. Some historical treatments involve things like applying cold compresses to the genitals, purging the bowels, or even surgically removing the ovaries in girls.
Holy shit. That's brutal. Thank God for modern medicine, right? I mean, I'm all for a good detox, but surgically removing ovaries is a bit extreme even for me. So we've come a long way from blaming demons and chopping off ovaries. That's progress for sure. But what about the kids who actually want to go through puberty early, the ones who feel like their bodies are lagging behind their identities?
That's a really important point, and it brings us to the topic of gender dysphoria. It's crucial to remember that precocious puberty isn't always a negative experience. For some children, particularly transgender youth, who identify as the gender opposite to their assigned sex at birth, early puberty can be incredibly distressing. Imagine being a transgender girl assigned male at birth who starts developing facial hair and a deep voice. That can be a traumatic experience that doesn't align with their true gender identity.
That's a whole other layer of complexity. So in those cases, using puberty blockers might actually be a way to support their gender identity, to give them time to figure things out without going through the wrong puberty.
Precisely. In those situations, puberty blockers can be a lifesaver. They provide a much-needed pause, allowing the child to explore their gender identity, access mental health support, and potentially pursue gender-affirming hormone therapy later on if that's what they choose.
So we've got this medication, these puberty blockers that can be used for both precocious puberty and gender dysphoria. Talk about a versatile little drug.
Yeah.
But it seems like the conversation around puberty blockers has become pretty heated lately, right? It's like everyone's got an opinion and they're not afraid to shout it from the rooftops.
You're right. The use of puberty blockers, especially in the context of transgender healthcare, has become increasingly politicized and controversial. There are strong opinions on both sides, and it's important to approach this topic with sensitivity and respect for all perspectives.
Yeah, no kidding. This isn't just about science anymore. It's about ethics, morality, and the rights of individuals to make choices about their own bodies. That's a goddamn minefield out there.
It is. But at its core, it's about providing the best possible care for children, listening to their needs and supporting their well-being. Whether we're talking about precocious puberty or gender dysphoria, the goal is to help these kids navigate a challenging time and ultimately thrive.
Well said. But let's be honest, this whole puberty blocker thing is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the complex world of hormones and gender. It's like we're just scratching the surface of a very deep and murky pond.
You're absolutely right. There's so much more to explore: the ethical considerations, the long-term implications, the societal impact of these medical advancements. It's a constantly evolving landscape, and we're all just trying to keep up.
Well, dear listeners, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the nitty-gritty science of precocious puberty to the ethical and social complexities of puberty blockers. It's been a wild ride, and we're not done yet. Join us for the final part of this episode, where we'll delve into some real-life stories of precocious puberty and explore the impact it's had on individuals and families. All right, you magnificent bastards, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been knee-deep in the hormonal swamp of precocious puberty, dissecting the science, exploring those batshit crazy historical theories, and even tiptoeing through the minefield of puberty blockers. But you know what's been missing from this conversation? The human element. The real-life stories of the kids and families dealing with this shit.
You're absolutely right. We've been focusing on the nuts and bolts, the technical jargon. But behind every diagnosis, every treatment decision, there's a real child going through something truly extraordinary. Their stories deserve to be heard.
So let's hear them. Give us the raw, unfiltered truth about what it's actually like to navigate this precocious puberty bullshit. Hit us with some real-life examples, some anecdotes, some stories that'll make us laugh or cry, or maybe even puke a little in our mouths.
All right, let's start with a case that really highlights the psychological impact of precocious puberty. I once treated a 6-year-old girl who started developing breasts and body hair. Imagine that. A first grader with the body of a teenager. She was teased mercilessly at school kids, called her names, and she became withdrawn and depressed. Her parents were heartbroken, they felt helpless, and they were terrified about the long-term consequences for their daughter.
Damn, that's rough. I can't even imagine being that young and dealing with that shit. It's like being thrown into the deep end of puberty without even knowing how to swim.
Yeah.
So what happened? Did those puberty blockers help her out?
They did. We started her on GnRH agonists, and within a few months, the physical changes stopped progressing. The teasing subsided, she started making friends, and her mood improved dramatically. It was like we'd given her a second chance at a normal childhood.
That's a powerful story. It shows how these treatments can be more than just medical interventions. They can be lifelines for these kids, a way to give them back their childhood. What about a case that illustrates the complexities of diagnosis? You know, those situations where it's not so clear-cut whether a kid has precocious puberty or is just an early bloomer?
I had a patient, an 8-year-old boy, who started showing some signs of puberty. A bit of pubic hair, a slight increase in testicle size. His parents were understandably concerned, but the physical exam wasn't conclusive, and his hormone levels were borderline. It was a tough call, but we decided to monitor him closely instead of starting treatment right away.
So you played the waiting game. What happened? Did the little dude turn into a teenage werewolf, or did things settle down?
As it turned out, he was just an early bloomer. Over the next year, he continued to develop at a normal pace, and it became clear that he didn't have precocious puberty. It's a good reminder that not every case requires medical intervention. Sometimes watchful waiting is the best approach.
Makes sense. But let's not forget about those controversial puberty blockers. You mentioned earlier that they're also used in the treatment of gender dysphoria. Can you give us an example of how that works in practice?
I worked with a transgender girl, assigned male at birth, who was experiencing extreme distress when she started going through male puberty. She was developing facial hair, her voice was deepening, and she felt completely alienated from her own body. We started her on puberty blockers, and it was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The physical changes stopped. She was able to explore her gender identity without the added burden of unwanted puberty, and she eventually started transitioning with hormone therapy.
That's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It shows how these medications can be truly life-changing for transgender youth, giving them the space to figure out who they are without being trapped in a body that doesn't feel right. But I know there are a lot of people out there who are skeptical about using puberty blockers for gender dysphoria. They worry about the long-term effects, the ethics of interfering with a child's natural development. What do you say to those concerns?
It's important to acknowledge those concerns and to engage in open and honest conversations about the risks and benefits of puberty blockers. The research on their long-term effects is still evolving, but the evidence so far suggests that they're safe and reversible, and for transgender youth, the potential benefits. Alleviating distress, preventing the development of unwanted secondary sex characteristics, allowing them to live authentically, can be profound.
It's all about weighing the potential risks and benefits, right? Making informed decisions based on the individual child's needs and circumstances. But let's be real, this is a hot-button issue, and there are strong opinions on both sides. It's like trying to navigate a minefield of emotions, politics, and misinformation.
Absolutely. It's a topic that often gets tangled up in politics, ideology, and misinformation. It's crucial to separate the science from the noise, to focus on the well-being of these children, and to advocate for their right to access appropriate and compassionate health care.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the medical nuts and bolts of precocious puberty to the ethical complexities of puberty blockers, and the real-life stories of the kids and families navigating this challenging terrain. It's been an intense journey, and I gotta admit, I'm feeling a bit emotionally drained.
I hear you. It's heavy stuff, but it's also incredibly important stuff. These conversations need to be had. These issues need to be brought to light, and these children deserve our support and understanding.
Absolutely. So, dear listeners, we'll leave you with this final thought. Precocious puberty and the use of puberty blockers are complex issues with no easy answers. There are medical considerations, ethical dilemmas, and social implications that we all need to grapple with. But let's not forget the human element, the children at the center of these conversations. Their stories matter, their voices deserve to be heard, and their well-being should be our guiding principle. That's a wrap on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep those brains firing. We'll catch you magnificent bastards on the next episode.